Hello there everyone, I'm your German snob, and once again I saw a movie just yesterday. Also wanted to make this video yesterday, but I didn't get to it. So, be it as it may be, I have seen Cloud Atlas. And I know that in places of, actual civilization, this movie has been out for like 3 or 4 weeks now. But here in, the glorious People's Republic of Germany, it's only been out since last Thursday, I believe. So I only got to see it yesterday. And, well, what can I say? It's a really impressive movie for whatever it's worth. It's, a epic movie. It's like the kind of movie you think of when you think of a big, ambitious Hollywood kind of production. Because that's exactly what it is. And in that way, I believe it's a very rare thing in our time. Seeing how it's really a movie that tries a lot of things that very few movies try, and almost no really big movies try. And that is, in my opinion, something very impressive. Well, you see, the thing about Cloud Atlas is that that's trying to tell a story using six completely different storylines. The first one being kind of a period piece about a English attorney helping an African slave to get to England, um, and to try to liberate him, while he himself suffers from a no, terminal illness that threatens to kill him on his way between Africa and Europe. That would be the first story. The second one would be the one of a struggling young homosexual composer in like Victorian England who has to leave his lover behind in Cambridge to study under a very famous and very successful composer. Um, and it tells his story. The next one is the story of a young female reporter played by Halle Berry in the 70s who tries to uncover a corporate conspiracy by a company of oil lobbyists, which is played like some sort of spy thriller. Um, and then the next one is a story set in the present, which is kind of played like a British style comedy about an aging writer who, due to some events I won't spoil now, is committed to a retirement home and then tries to break out of it, which again is a more comedic kind of story. The next story, on the other hand, is like a Blade Runner-esque cyberpunkish futuristic dystopian thriller about a set in futuristic South Korea, Seoul, following a clone who's basically kept as a slave in that setting, and who, with the help of a man who works for a rebel alliance, tries to break out of her life and join the rebel alliance to change the world and to change that oppressive society. While the last storyline is about a post well, it's set in the post-apocalypse, and it follows a man from a almost primitive tribe who teams up with a woman from a futuristic kind of higher higher developed society to send a message from the dying Earth to some sort of aliens to find a new planet to settle on. And that's chronologically the last story. So that being said, the movie is less just, well, in a way, it's more like six movies, but all put together into one movie that admittedly is 3 hours long, which should be mentioned here, but is still it's still quite a lot for one single movie. So the big question is, how does it pull it off? If you want to hear my opinion, in fact, very well. And I would almost say as well as you could do such a thing. It is, as you may have seen, a very difficult subject matter. And by the way, yeah, I do know that the movie is based on a book, which I haven't read. And for the most time, I didn't even know that the book existed. So I can't really say how the movie stands as an adaptation of that book. So, no idea about that. But what was interesting about it is that it was adapted by the Wachowski siblings, the people who did the Matrix movies, and Tom Tykwer, who I think is a German director, who did some movies I actually don't care for a lot. Run Lola Run, The Perfume. Never seen any of those. Can't say I really care for them, but they got pretty good reviews, so okay, just gonna believe him. Tom Tykwer, yeah. Now, that's something I found kind of interesting, because you could almost say that the Wachowski brothers were the people who, now not the Wachowski brothers anymore, one of them's a woman now. The Wachowski siblings are, in my opinion, the people who invented the mainstream art movie, to put it like that. If it wasn't for Matrix, something like Inception wouldn't exist now. Because they were, in my opinion, the people who put the Hollywood action movie on a higher level. And so therefore, it's just logical that they try to top themselves in that regard. That they will keep to push the boundaries of what is acceptable as a mainstream movie. And that's something they definitely did with Cloud Atlas. Because that's one of the most ambitious, one of the most complex, at least mainstream movies I've ever seen. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm an art movie geek. I have seen a lot of not exactly accessible movies. And I know my David Lynch's and my Charlie Kaufman's and my Lars von Trier's and such. But the thing about people like those is that their movies, while very inaccessible, while very artsy, and while very difficult, just to put it like that, while very difficult, are not trying to market themselves to a mainstream audience. They know that they're trying to fill a very small niche audience. And therefore, it's always very apparent that behind those movies there is not much of a big budget, that there are not that many big names connected to it. And that, well, again, the production values are not really that high. I mean, usually they do find a way to compensate for these things just by, by well-made direction. But that's beside the point. Now, Cloud Atlas is very different from that, because it's really a very visually impressive, a very, well, not only well acted, but also a movie with a lot of very recognizable actors connected to it. And I think that's the really noticeable thing about it, you dig? I mean, thing is, just like 10 years ago, you would have thought that a movie with such a premise, a movie that tries to tell 6 interconnected stories, with, and I'll get into that later, with very big, very important, very meaningful themes, in again 6 different stories, could never have been like a big Hollywood release. That would have been completely impossible back then. And again, we pretty much owe it to the Wachowskis that such a thing is even possible right now. Not only to them, I mean, there were also the Christopher Nolans and the David Finchers and such who contributed to that development. But I think it really started with them doing Matrix. But whatever. Yeah, that such a thing gets such a big release with such a big budget and such big names attached to it. I mean, you have in the leading roles, you have people like Tom Hanks, like Halle Berry, like Hugo Weaving. You had Susan Sarandon. That all these people made what's basically just, again, 20 years ago would have been some sort of small budget, foreign, you've probably never heard of it kind of indie flick. But they are actually trying to sell this to a mainstream audience. If that's going to work, I don't know. So far, it seems to be pretty successful. I mean, admittedly, it got a lot of, at least here in Germany, it got a lot of advertising, which I found really surprising. Because usually, and just take my word for it, German media is painfully anti-intellectual. And I know not only German mainstream media, it's that way basically all over the world. But you don't know what real anti-intellectualism even is if you haven't turned on a German television program at like, say, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If you're German, you know what I'm talking about. But that's beside the point. But yeah, this movie got a lot of advertising here. So unsurprisingly, the movie was pretty well visited yesterday when I watched it, which I found actually pretty surprising, because, just for the records, I live somewhere in the middle of nowhere, in like the countryside in Bavaria. And to say that much, some small town in the middle of nowhere in Bavaria is not actually the capital of the German avant-garde. Quite surprisingly, I know. That's just the way it is. So therefore, yeah, I was surprised at how many people watched this movie. Because while I do think that in Cloud Atlas there is a lot of stuff that some people will like, or rather, there is, let's put it like that. I believe most people will find something to like about the movie. People who enjoy comic relief will probably like the more comedic segments with set in that retirement home. People who like action movies will very much enjoy the science fiction plot lines. People who like period movies will maybe like the Victorian or the storyline about the slave trader. Yeah. But I'm not sure if there are that many people who will really enjoy the movie as a whole. And what's even more important, who will really pick up on the underlying themes. The stuff that actually connects all these plot lines. Now again, I'm not underestimating the mainstream moviegoer. Quite the opposite, actually. I think that the mainstream audience is right now more open-minded to new and unconventional ideas than it has ever been. But thing is, there are not many movies like that coming out and getting that much advertisement in mainstream media. So someone who's not used to this kind of movie And again, this may just me being a, well, snob, but I think you kind of have to have some experience with more challenging movies to really get into something like Cloud Atlas. And I mean, Quod erat demonstrandum, movie critic Roger Ebert, who criticizes movies for 40 years or like 40 years now, even called Cloud Atlas a mystery. Now, this is a man who knows more about movies than any one of us probably ever will. And even he said that he didn't get the whole of it. So I think that someone who's not really used to, or who has almost never seen a art movie, will be quite overwhelmed by it. I do believe that everyone should give it a chance. I'm just saying that many people will probably not enjoy all of it, and will probably not get the most out of it. Again, because some of the underlying themes are not that apparent. I mean, yeah, talking about these underlying themes, there are of course quite a few that really go through all of the plot lines and connect them with each other and try to build a narrative that is more than just the sum of its parts. Now, of course, a really big theme in the movie, and you may have picked up on that from my plot summaries of the single storylines, is of course a theme of oppression, mostly the oppression of minorities. There was, of course, that part about slave trading and liberating of the slaves. There was that part about homosexuality in like 30 years England. There was that part about, in a futuristic setting, about clones being treated as slaves. And there's that part about, even though again done in a more humorous way, about that older person being basically held captive, being basically imprisoned in his retirement home against his will. That's of course a very big theme in their oppression and the fight against oppression and rebellion, which I think is one of the more clear themes to pick up on. But there is of course more to it. And again, it's more complex than that. There's also a big theme of romance and of love in there. Basically, what I believe the movie was trying to do is to tell a story of a couple of two lovers being reincarnated in a lot of different time periods, and also examining how the relationships would play out in these time periods, which I found pretty interesting because in some of them it worked out normally, but in some other of them that love story ended tragically. In some of them they were torn apart in a pretty big part of their life, and that I think was pretty interesting. It also is connected to the other theme of oppression and discrimination, because usually those two people came from very different classes of society. And again, I don't really want to spoil anything, but again, there was in one period the romance between a clone and a, well, normal person. In another one, the relationship between a tribal villager and a woman from a really highly developed culture. And by the way, talking about that, what I found really interesting about that one storyline set in the post-apocalypse is how the language of the people there changed. How the tribal people spoke a very simplified, a very degenerated form of English, which I found really well realized, but that's beside the point. Talking about the themes here, and I think that's another pretty big part, reincarnation. Because I do believe that most of them are just very different, or that there are really just a few main characters in there. And they get reincarnated in very different roles in every time period that is shown in the movie. So that I found pretty interesting. Now, connected to that theme of reincarnation, that would almost remind one of like East Asian spiritualism, is also the usage of its actors. Because the thing is, a lot of different actors play very different roles. Or in other words, one actor plays, in some occasions, a lot of very different roles. And that's not only connected to the time period it's set in. Some actors play people of different ethnicities, and on one occasion even of a different gender. That's something I found really interesting. I mean, the actors that were mostly cast in different roles were Tom Hanks, Halle Berry, and Hugo Weaving. Now, Tom Hanks in one occasion played not only a white man, I think at one point he also played an Asian person, I believe. Well, not sure, but definitely Halle Berry at one point played a Jewish woman. And therefore white. A white redhead, in fact, which the makeup on her was actually pretty good. And there was that one Asian actress who, again towards the ending, played a white woman, which, to be fair, was still pretty obvious, but it was also obvious that we were meant to recognize the actress, so I guess that may have been intentional. So that's pretty interestingly done. Also because the same actor was not necessarily connected to the same incarnated character. And, well, these are the kind of things that will let you, or that give you the feeling that there is something more going on beneath the obvious stuff in the movie, beneath the obvious themes. That there are a lot of little connections and a lot of different ideas and reoccurring motifs in there that are not apparent on your first viewing. And I will admit at this point, I guess no, in fact I'm sure that there is a lot of stuff I have missed, and a lot of reasons for me to rewatch the movie, to see what it was actually trying to do at some points. And as soon as it's going to come out on DVD, I certainly will do that. But even on my first viewing in theater, I recognized that there was something really big going on, and this movie is in fact very ambitious. And that there is a lot of stuff in there that is really respectable. That people really tried to, and that's what I believe, that they were really going for making their masterpiece, their really big kind of movie. And I think for the most part they actually succeeded. And that's the amazing thing about it. It may not be perfect in every respect. Again, I do believe that some of the plotlines could have used a bit more fleshing out. That there were some plot threads that were hard to follow, but again, that may have just been me. But other than that, it's a really, really well-made movie. And I think that's a pretty important part. It's a very well made movie. The direction is great. And they did such a great job in making so many different kind of settings and so many different uh, storylines to give them all their own feeling, to make them all feel and look so much different. As it really appears as if you're watching 6 different movies that are just kind of spliced into one. That was really impressive. The music was great. The acting was very good. I was amazed at how some of the actors really managed to portray such different characters, all in such a believable way. And at some points I really was surprised. I mean, I knew Tom Hanks was a good actor. I will admit that I always kind of underestimated Halle Berry. I always thought she was just one of these dare to look pretty actresses. But that's really not the case. This is the movie where you really see that she's genuinely talented. Really appreciated that a lot. Almost makes me always makes, you know, Catwoman look excusable. Almost. Okay, but maybe I am too harsh on Halle Berry at this part. Maybe it is just genuinely hard for a black woman to get good roles in Hollywood. Which would be pretty sad, in fact. But, you know, beside the point. So yeah, just from a purely technical aspect, it's an impressive movie. And just in that way, I believe it's a movie people should see. Even though, well, you know, just my opinion. Because you can see at every point how much effort there went into it. And I think it's the first time where I saw what's basically in its essence a art movie being made with such a amount of not really effort, but such a amount of, I guess, pure Hollywoodness poured into it, that people really wanted to give this kind of movie a big budget, that they wanted to make it an epic, which it definitely is. And you know, right now I can tell that this is the kind of movie where people in like 20 years will say they don't make them like this anymore, for whatever that's worth to you. And I'm sure it will be fondly remembered. Now again, I'm not saying that it's perfect in any way. I'm just saying that it's probably kind of a, maybe not once in a lifetime, but at least it's a very rare kind of movie. Where like big directors and big actors were really willing to take a risk to make such a big, intelligent movie accessible to the mainstream, to make a art movie that people actually watch. And I think that willingness to take a risk should be rewarded. So yeah, what can I say? I really enjoyed it. And again, even though, well, it was the kind of movie I like, that much I will admit at this point. It was exactly the kind of stuff I enjoy. And I can't promise you that you will enjoy it. I can just give you my opinion on it. But I do believe that you should see it, that you should give it a chance. Even though it may not exactly be the kind of movie you usually like. It's still interesting and well made enough to at least deserve to be given a chance. Now, there is that, I guess you can say, you can call it a little anecdote of when I saw the movie. Because the thing is, and this is probably going to sound like I'm making that up, but nah, really not. Because with me in the theater, right in the row before me, there was like a, I would like to call it a school class, but no, probably not. There were like 10 kids watching the movie, which I found really kind of surreal. Because I couldn't for the life of me think why a bunch of, well, the movie got a rating, like legally you have to be 12 to watch it here in Germany, so I will just give them the benefit of doubt and say, okay, let's just assume that they were actually 12 years old. Of like 12-year-old little girls, why would a bunch of 12-year-old little girls on a Saturday evening at 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock go and decide to watch Cloud Atlas? I couldn't for the life of me think of a reason. I mean, I don't know, maybe they got lost on the way to Wreck-It Ralph, which by the way only comes out in December here in Germany, so probably not, but uh, I don't know, it was so weird. And I mean, them being kids were in fact pretty loud, so uh, I could have thought of a better audience to watch this movie with, but beside the point. But that's the part I thought was really, really funny in a way. Mostly because, I mean, think about it. Like, just 20 years ago, this would have been a movie that would have been watched by a bunch of, well, art movie lovers only. And mainstream audience probably would have never heard of it. And now in 2012, this is the kind of movie a bunch of little girls watch on a Saturday evening. It's kind of insane, actually. But yeah, what will you say? Just seems to be the way it is these days. And maybe I should be glad about that. Well, in fact, most definitely I should. So yeah, what can I say? I love this movie. It's just, you wouldn't think something like that would work. I mean, there were quite a few movies that tried to combine the art house with the mainstream. And most of them didn't succeed very well. I mean, back in the 80s, when they got David Lynch to direct an adaptation of Dune, it failed horribly. Just a few years ago, when Zack Snyder directed Sucker Punch, it failed terribly. Because usually this kind of movie doesn't succeed. And usually this kind of movie isn't even given a real chance, you know? I mean, I do remember Sucker Punch not even being played in most cinemas around here. Just like Scott Pilgrim vs. the World 3 years ago. Even though I'm not calling Scott Pilgrim an artsy movie in any kind. Still a movie I like a lot, but no, it's not exactly a very intellectually challenging movie. But just unconventional enough to be kind of obscure. Well, whatever. Yeah, usually this kind of movie really fails. And now I'm really impressed to see that Cloud Atlas is actually given a chance in theaters. That this gets a big release. That this gets a lot of advertising. I think that this may be the point where we should really give a movie like that a chance. Even those who are not that used to more challenging movies. Even those should give it a chance. Because in my opinion it's totally worth it. Because in my opinion that may be that movie that strikes the perfect balance between between obscure indie movie and big budget Hollywood production. And again, I'm not saying everyone will like it. I am not even saying that most will like it. In fact, I assume that it's going to be the kind of movie where there is going to be a split reaction to it. Where on the one side, people will love it and call it one of the greatest movies of the year, or maybe one of the greatest movies ever, and then the other side, people will be all like, nah, it was pretentious, it was drawn out, it lacked focus, it could go either way. But I think it deserves to be given a chance. At least that's my opinion. And you know, as a critic, which, to be fair, I not really am, but as someone who does reviews, I think that's all I can give you, an opinion. And I think the best thing I can advertise you to do, or recommend you to do, is to make your own opinion, to go and see it, and, well, find out what you think about it yourself. Again, you can take my opinion as what I said about it, maybe as much as that may tell you, and as much as my opinion means to you, sure, you could take it as sort of as a recommendation. But you know, at last it's all about what you think about the movie. And I can just recommend you to give it a chance. I'm not saying, so therefore, no, I'm not saying it is a great movie. I'm just saying that I thought it was a great movie. So, no, I don't think that anyone should take my word for a gospel. So, maybe you're going to disagree with me. That I would be very okay with. But again, I recommend it. You should totally watch Cloud Atlas. If only to tell people that you have watched it. And I believe that's all I have to say about it. I am your German snob. This is my opinion on Cloud Atlas. And I will see you as soon as possible. So, see you all and goodbye.